What if I told you that the greatest economic battle of our time isn't fought with missiles or tanks, but with tariffs and rare earth minerals? Today, we're diving into the hidden strategies of how China outsmarted the world's most powerful economy in a trade war that's reshaping global power. This isn't just international politics, it's a masterclass in strategic thinking that will change how you see the world economy forever. Welcome to Story-Driven English, where we transform complex global events into captivating stories that boost your English skills while expanding your understanding of the world. I'm Azalea, and whether you're looking to improve your business English, prepare for international exams, or simply understand global affairs in English, you're in exactly the right place. In just the next 20 minutes, you'll discover the brilliant countermoves China used to weather a 34% tariff storm. Learn powerful English vocabulary used in international business and politics, and understand strategic thinking that applies to both global trade and everyday negotiations. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and notification bell right now. Our community of English learners gets exclusive vocabulary guides, pronunciation tips, and interactive challenges with every video. Plus, subscribers get early access to our monthly live English discussions with experts in international business and diplomacy. Now, let's dive into the dragon's strategic move. Story of economic warfare, calculated patience, and the invisible weapons that can bring superpowers to the negotiating table. The dragon's response. A story of trade war strategy in the bustling financial district of Beijing. Li Wei stared out of his office window at the gleaming skyscrapers that symbolized China's meteoric economic rise. As a senior economic advisor to the Chinese government, he had just received news that would send shockwaves through global markets. The United States had announced a sweeping 34% tariff on all Chinese imports, effective immediately. President Donald Trump had declared it Liberation Day for American manufacturing, but Li knew it was the opening salvo in what could become the most significant trade conflict of the century. So it begins, Li murmured to himself, watching the spring rain tap against the window. His phone buzzed incessantly as colleagues and international counterparts sought his insights. The Chinese leadership needed to respond, and quickly. But how? This wasn't 2018, when the first trade tensions had emerged. This was 2025, and China was a different economic power now, more technologically advanced, more globally integrated, yet also more cautious about its vulnerabilities. Li gathered his notes for the emergency meeting with the State Council. As he walked through the corridors of power, he reflected on the complex economic chessboard before them. China couldn't match America's firepower dollar for dollar. Their economies were asymmetrically linked through trade surpluses. But they had other weapons in their arsenal, strategies that had been quietly developing for years. The meeting room was thick with tension when Li arrived. Vice Premier Chen Jiangguo nodded gravely as Li took his seat at the large mahogany table. Representatives from various ministries, finance, commerce, industry, and technology, sat with stern expressions. data sheets and tablets before them. "We have options," Chen began, his voice measured. "But we must be strategic. This is not a time for emotional responses, but calculated moves that protect our interests while minimizing self-inflicted damage." Li cleared his throat. "We've analyzed several potential response scenarios. A mirror image retaliatory tariff would be the most straightforward, but not necessarily the most effective." A young economist from the Ministry of Finance interjected, "If we match their 34% tariff on all American goods, we'll only hurt ourselves more. We import far less from them than they do from us, which is precisely why we need to be smarter." Li replied, "Our response must be precise, targeted, and leverage our unique advantages." For the next 3 hours, they debated various strategies, examining economic models and political implications. By the end, a multi-pronged approach had emerged, one that would demonstrate China's resolve without triggering economic self-destruction. The following day, China's response was announced to the world. A matching 34% tariff on all U.S. imports would indeed be implemented. But that was only the public-facing element of a much more sophisticated strategy. Li sat in his apartment that evening, watching international news coverage of China's announcement. Financial markets had reacted with immediate sell-offs. The yuan had weakened slightly, as expected and quietly permitted by the central bank, a natural shock absorber that would soften the blow to Chinese exporters. His phone rang. It was Sarah Johnson, an old classmate from his MIT economics doctorate days. Now working for the U.S. Treasury Department. "Wei, this is escalating faster than anyone anticipated," she said, foregoing pleasantries. "What's Beijing's endgame here?" Li sighed. "The same as Washington's, I suspect. To protect national interests while positioning for an eventual negotiation from strength. But the export controls on rare earths, that's a serious escalation," Sarah noted, "as are your semiconductor restrictions." Li countered, "This isn't about tit for tat anymore. It's about strategic leverage. The agricultural tariffs are hitting our heartland hard," Sarah admitted. "Very targeted." Li remained silent. The targeting of American farm exports had been his suggestion, not out of malice, but strategic calculation. Those exports came primarily from politically significant states, and the timing during planting season was no coincidence. "We both know neither side can afford a protracted economic war," Sarah continued. "The question is who blinks first." "Perhaps," Li replied non-committally. "Or perhaps it's about who can endure the longest." After they hung up, Li walked to his bookshelf and pulled down an ancient text, The Art of War by Sun Tzu. He had always found wisdom in the ancient strategist's words. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Over the next weeks, China's strategy unfolded on multiple fronts. In the port city of Qingdao, customs officials began implementing the new tariff regime on American imports. Michael Zhang, a mid-level customs administrator, found himself at the front line of the trade conflict. Another shipment of American agricultural equipment his colleague noted, reviewing the manifest of a recently docked cargo ship. That's a 34% additional duty, Michael nodded. And what about the John Deere parts? Are they on the priority inspection list? Yes, full documentation review and extended inspection protocols. His colleague confirmed this was part of the unseen strategy while tariffs made headlines. Administrative delays and enhanced inspections created additional friction for American imports without generating international headlines. Meanwhile, in the rare earth processing facilities of Inner Mongolia, production continued as usual, but export permits were becoming notably more difficult to obtain. Chen Mai, Director of International Sales for Northern Rare Earth Group, was explaining the situation to her American clients via video conference. I understand your frustration, Mr. Davidson, but the new export licensing requirements are beyond our control, she explained patiently. The processing time for samarium and terbium exports has increased to 45 business days. Yes, that's much longer than before. The American purchasing manager looked exasperated. Our production line can't wait that long. These components are essential for our defense systems manufacturing. Chen maintained her professional demeanor. We are equally concerned. Perhaps your government and ours can find a resolution to the current tensions that would alleviate these restrictions. This too was strategic. Rare earth elements were critical inputs for everything from smartphones to missile guidance systems, and China controlled roughly 80% of global processing capacity. Unlike crude tariffs, these export controls targeted American vulnerabilities with surgical precision. In Washington, D.C., trade negotiators and economic advisors were scrambling to assess China's response and formulate counter-strategies. The White House Situation Room had become a de facto trade war command center. They're not just matching our tariffs, explained Treasury Secretary William Foster, pointing to economic impact projections on the large screen. They're systematically targeting our pressure points: agriculture in our political heartland, rare earths for our technology and defense industries, and creating regulatory hurdles for our companies operating in China and their currency. The president asked. Modest depreciation, only about 3% against the dollar, replied the Federal Reserve representative. They're being careful not to trigger capital flight or antagonize other trading partners. It's just enough to offset some tariff impact for their exporters. What about their domestic measures? How are they cushioning the blow internally? Asked the Commerce Secretary. Multiple approaches, answered the CIA economic analyst. They're channeling tariff revenues to support affected export manufacturers. Their central bank has cut reserve requirements for lending to small and medium enterprises. Local governments are accelerating infrastructure projects to absorb potential layoffs from export sectors. The president leaned back in his chair. So, they've prepared for this. What's our next move? The room fell silent. The escalation options all carried significant risks. Back in Beijing, Li Wei was summoned to a private meeting with Vice Premier Chen. They met in the ancient imperial garden. away from microphones and electronic devices. The Americans are threatening another 50% tariff increase if we don't withdraw our countermeasures, Chen informed him as they walked among flowering plum trees. Li nodded. We anticipated this. They're testing our resolve. And your recommendation? We should make it clear we're prepared for a war of attrition, Li replied. Our position should be firm. We will fight to the end if necessary. The economic costs will be substantial. Chen noted, yes, but we've diversified our trade relationships since the first trade conflicts. Our dependency on the American market has decreased. Our technology sectors have strengthened. We've built financial alternatives with currency swap agreements across 40 countries. Chen stopped walking and turned to Li. In your assessment, can we withstand this pressure better than they can? Li considered carefully before answering. Economically, we'll feel more immediate pain due to our export dependency. But politically, our system can absorb economic discomfort more readily than their democratic system. Their elections are approaching. We need to demonstrate that we cannot be coerced, while keeping the door open for negotiations when political circumstances become more favorable. Chen nodded slowly. Then we will announce our position. China will fight to the end. The international business community watched with growing alarm as the world's two largest economies engaged in an escalating trade war. In the gleaming headquarters of Global Trade Partners in Shanghai, CEO Richard Wong addressed his multinational executive team. We need to prepare for all scenarios, he told them gravely. Our exposure to both markets means we're caught in the crossfire. Emily Chen, his head of supply chain operations, displayed a complex diagram on the conference room screen. We've mapped out alternative sourcing routes for critical components. Vietnamese and Malaysian suppliers can replace some of our Chinese manufacturing if U.S. tariffs increase further. For products bound for America, we can shift final assembly to our facilities in Mexico to avoid the full impact of Chinese origin tariffs. What about our rare earth supply? Asked the chief technology officer. That's more problematic, Emily admitted. China's export controls are creating bottlenecks. Australian and Canadian mines are ramping up, but their processing capacity is limited. We're looking at a 6-12 month supply constraint at minimum, Richard nodded grimly. And our China market strategy? The marketing director spoke up. We're accelerating our Chinese brand localization. The government appears to be distinguishing between American products and multinational companies with significant local presence and investment. Our messaging emphasizes our 20-year commitment to the Chinese market and our local R&D centers. This corporate scramble was playing out in thousands of companies worldwide, a massive reconfiguration of global supply chains triggered by geopolitical tensions. In rural Iowa, fifth-generation farmer John Peterson surveyed his soybean fields with concern. The Chinese market had once purchased nearly a third of American soybean exports, but retaliatory tariffs had devastated prices. They've hit us right at planting season, he told his son as they checked irrigation equipment. Beijing knows exactly what they're doing. Can we switch crops? His son asked. John shook his head. Too late for this season. We're committed now. We just have to hope the administration secures some trade deal before harvest. Similar conversations were happening across America's agricultural heartland, creating political pressure precisely where Chinese strategists had anticipated. Meanwhile, in the industrial city of Shenzhen, factory owner Liu Jiangguo was implementing his own adaptive strategies. His electronics manufacturing facility had previously exported 70% of its production to the United States. We need to accelerate our market diversification plan, he told his management team. Increase shipments to Southeast Asia, Europe, and domestic channels. For American clients, we'll offer to ship components to our Vietnamese partner facility for final assembly and export. His sales director looked concerned. But our margins will be squeezed either way. Yes, Liu acknowledged. That's why we're also accelerating our move upmarket. The government's semiconductor initiative has opened opportunities for higher value production that's less price sensitive. We've been approved for subsidized loans to upgrade our precision manufacturing equipment. This too was part of China's strategic response, not just countering American tariffs, but using the crisis as catalyst to accelerate their industrial upgrading toward higher value technologies. In Washington, the U.S. Trade Representative's office was analyzing reports from thousands of American companies seeking tariff exemptions. The sheer volume of applications had overwhelmed the system, creating backlogs and uncertainty. We can't approve all of these, muttered Deputy Trade Representative Jennifer Martinez, reviewing the stack of applications. But denying them means higher costs for American manufacturers and consumers, her assistant nodded sympathetically. The medical device manufacturers are especially concerned about the rare earth restrictions. They're reporting price increases of 40% for magnetic components, and the technology companies, they're accelerating their supply chain diversification, but it takes time. Many are reporting at least 18 months before they can significantly reduce Chinese sourcing, Jennifer sighed. So we're asking American businesses and consumers to bear significant costs while waiting for long-term structural changes that may or may not materialize. This was the dilemma of trade wars while the macroeconomic battle played out between nations. The microeconomic pain was distributed among businesses and citizens who had little influence over the conflict's resolution. Back in Beijing, Li Wei was analyzing economic data from the first month of reciprocal tariffs. The impacts were significant, but not catastrophic. China's export growth had slowed but not collapsed. The carefully managed currency depreciation had offset approximately one-third of the tariff impacts for exporters. Domestic stimulus measures were maintaining employment levels, though at the cost of increased debt. More worryingly, foreign investment inflows had declined sharply as international companies paused expansion plans amid uncertainty. The stock markets in Shanghai and Shenzhen had experienced substantial volatility. Li presented his findings to the Economic Strategy Committee. We're weathering the initial storm, but a prolonged conflict will require more substantial adaptation. The Commerce Minister nodded. We're seeing accelerated interest in our Belt and Road partner countries. Companies are establishing what they call China Plus One strategies, maintaining Chinese production while developing alternative manufacturing. Bases elsewhere in Asia, we should encourage this regional integration, Li suggested. It aligns with our long-term objectives for Asian economic architecture with China at its center, the technology minister added. The American export restrictions on advanced semiconductors are creating short-term challenges, but accelerating our domestic innovation. Investments in our chip manufacturing capabilities have tripled. Li turned to the broader strategic question. And our assessment of American resolve? The Foreign Ministry representative spoke up. Their business community is increasingly vocal about the costs of tariffs. Their agricultural states are reporting significant hardship. Their stock market is underperforming. However, the political environment remains hawkish on China. Both parties are competing to appear tough on trade. Then we maintain our current approach, concluded Vice Premier Chen. We signal willingness to negotiate, but from a position of strength and resolve. We continue targeted countermeasures while minimizing self-inflicted damage. And we prepare for a potential prolonged economic competition in the farming communities of the American Midwest. The impacts of China's agricultural tariffs were becoming increasingly visible. Community meetings and small town halls were filled with worried voices. We've lost our biggest export market overnight, declared a local cooperative manager at a town hall in rural Minnesota. China was buying a quarter of our soybean production. Those markets took decades to develop. The administration promised aid packages. One farmer pointed out, government handouts aren't the same as earned income from exports. Another replied, and they're temporary. What happens when that money runs out, but the tariffs remain? Local congressional representatives were feeling the pressure. In his district office, Congressman James Wilson was hearing from constituents daily about the impacts of the trade war. I understand the need to confront China on unfair practices, he told his Agricultural Advisory Committee. But our farmers shouldn't bear the brunt of this conflict. I'm pushing for a more targeted approach rather than broad tariffs that invite retaliation against our exports. This domestic political pressure was precisely what Chinese strategists had anticipated when targeting agricultural exports in their countermeasures. In Silicon Valley, technology executives were grappling with the implications of China's rare earth export controls. At a semiconductor manufacturer's emergency supply chain meeting, the mood was tense. We have perhaps 4 months of inventory for critical rare earth components, the head of procurement explained. After that, we face production constraints unless we can secure alternative sources. What about recycling from existing products? Asked the operations director. We're expanding those efforts, but the volumes are insufficient to replace primary supplies, was the sobering reply. The CEO looked grim. So we're facing potential production cuts by year-end, unless either the trade conflict resolves or alternative. Supplies come online, correct, and developing new mines outside China takes years, not months. This vulnerability highlighted America's strategic dependence on Chinese rare earth processing, a weakness that China was now exploiting as part of its trade war strategy. Meanwhile, in the gleaming headquarters of the People's Bank of China, Governor Wang Ling was chairing a meeting on monetary policy responses to the trade tensions. We must balance multiple objectives, she told her team of economic experts. We need to provide sufficient liquidity to stressed export sectors without triggering broader inflation or encouraging excessive speculation, her deputy pointed to the latest currency charts. The market is testing how much yuan depreciation will tolerate. A 10% depreciation would offset most of the tariff impact, but could trigger capital outflows and tensions with other trading partners. We'll allow modest market-driven adjustment, perhaps 5% total, but intervene to prevent disorderly movements, Wang decided. And will cut reserve requirements for banks lending to export-oriented SMEs by an additional 50 basis points. This careful calibration of currency and monetary policy was another dimension of China's strategic response, using domestic policy tools to cushion the impact of American tariffs, while avoiding measures that could backfire through financial instability. In Brussels, European Union trade officials were watching the escalating US-China conflict with growing concern. The EU's Chief Trade Commissioner Helena Bergman was briefing member state representatives, were increasingly caught in the crossfire, she explained. Both Washington and Beijing are pressuring us to take sides. The Americans are demanding we join their tariff actions. The Chinese are offering preferential market access if we maintain independent policies and our position. Asked the German representative, we're advocating for two compliant approaches and offering to mediate, but preparing for spillover effects regardless. Our businesses report increasing friction in both markets as tensions escalate. This third-party perspective highlighted how the bilateral trade war was reshaping the broader global economic landscape, forcing countries and companies worldwide to adapt to a fragmenting economic order. Back in Washington, President Trump was meeting with his economic advisors to assess the impact of China's countermeasures. Their targeted approach is creating political pressure points, acknowledged the Agriculture Secretary. Farm state senators and representatives are reporting significant constituent concern and the rare earth restrictions. The president asked, becoming serious, replied the Defense Secretary. These materials are essential for our military supply chains. We're accelerating domestic production initiatives, but they're years from full capacity. So what are our options? The president demanded. The Treasury Secretary spoke carefully. We can escalate further with additional tariffs as threatened. That would demonstrate resolve, but also increase costs to our economy. Or we can signal openness to negotiations while maintaining existing pressure. What's your assessment of their strategy? The president asked the National Security Advisor, They appear prepared for a war of attrition, came the measured response. They've diversified their export markets, built regional economic integration. That's less dependent on American consumers, and are using the pressure to accelerate their move up the technology value chain. They've prepared domestic measures to cushion the blow to their economy, so they think they can outlast us. The president concluded, they're betting that our political system will face greater pressure from economic pain than their authoritarian system. The National Security Advisor confirmed. We're more responsive to business and consumer concerns in the short term. Then we need to demonstrate equal resolve, the president decided. Announce that we're prepared to implement the additional 50% tariffs if they don't withdraw there. Countermeasures. As news of the additional tariff threat broke, global markets tumbled further. In financial centers from Hong Kong to London to New York, traders scrambled to adjust positions and hedge risks. In his Beijing office, Li Wei received the news of America's escalation threat with a grim expression. His phone immediately lit up with messages from ministerial colleagues seeking analysis and recommendations. I called Vice Premier Chen directly. This is becoming the scenario we prepared for, a test of endurance rather than a quick resolution. Your recommendation? Chen asked. We should respond firmly, but avoid unnecessary escalation, Li advised. We announce that China will fight to the end if the U.S. persists with additional tariffs. We highlight the mutual harm of escalation, and we quietly continue our multi-pronged adaptation strategy. Chen agreed. Draft the statement. I'll take it to the leadership immediately. By the following day, China's position was clear. It would not back down in the face of threats. The official government statement declared China would fight to the end against what it characterized as unilateral bullying. Financial markets reacted with increased volatility as traders priced in a potentially prolonged economic conflict between the world's largest economies. Months into the tariff conflict, economic data was beginning to show significant impacts on both economies. Chinese exports to the United States had declined by 21% compared to the previous year. Overall economic growth had slowed to 4.8%, still robust by global standards, but below the government's target. More worrying were the employment statistics from export-dependent regions. Several coastal provinces were reporting rising unemployment in manufacturing sectors. The stimulus measures were creating new jobs in infrastructure and domestic services, but the skills mismatch created transition challenges. Li prepared his report for the State Council with careful wording. The economic impacts are significant, but manageable in the short term. However, persistent trade barriers would require more substantial structural adjustments and could test our social stability management in some regions. As the conflict continued, global business leaders were increasingly vocal about the costs of economic fragmentation. At the World Economic Forum, executives from multinational corporations expressed growing concern, the bifurcation of the global economy into competing spheres would reverse decades of efficiency gains from integrated supply chains, warned the CEO of a European technology conglomerate. Neither the U.S. nor China would benefit from this outcome, and the rest of the world would be forced to choose sides in ways that undermine global growth. Yet, amid the gloom, others saw opportunities in the changing landscape. In Bangalore, India, technology entrepreneur Rajiv Mehta was explaining his company's strategy to investors as supply chains reconfigure away from overconcentration in China. We're positioning India as an alternative manufacturing hub for global markets, he explained enthusiastically. Our new electronics manufacturing campus breaks ground next month, with 5 multinational clients already committed to production lines. Similar developments were occurring in Vietnam, Mexico, and other countries positioned to benefit as companies diversified production beyond China. The trade conflict was accelerating a geographic redistribution of global manufacturing that had been gradually evolving for years. In Beijing, Li Wei was meeting with economic planners to discuss longer-term strategy as the trade conflict showed no signs of quick resolution. We need to continue our dual approach, he advised. Externally, we maintain our firm position against coercion, while signaling openness to equitable negotiations. Internally, we accelerate the economic rebalancing toward domestic consumption, technological self-reliance, and regional integration. His colleagues nodded in agreement. The Vice Minister of Technology added, the American pressure is actually helping overcome internal resistance to some necessary reforms. Provincial officials who previously protected local champions now accept the need for consolidation to create national champions capable of global competition. The Finance Ministry representative was more cautious. But we must be mindful of debt levels as we implement stimulus measures. We can't simply spend our way out of external pressure. Precisely, agreed Li. This is why we're emphasizing targeted support rather than broad stimulus. We're focusing resources on strategic sectors: semiconductors, artificial intelligence, renewable energy, where we can build sustainable competitive advantages. And our assessment of American resolve? Asked Vice Premier Chen, who had joined the meeting. I considered carefully. They face greater short-term political pressures from economic pain than we do. But their system also has greater capacity for reinvention and adaptation over time. We should prepare for a prolonged strategic competition rather than expect imminent concessions. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Then we continue our current approach: firm external resolve combined with internal adaptation and acceleration of our long-term economic evolution. As the trade conflict entered its second year, signs of economic adaptation were increasingly visible in both countries. In Shenzhen's manufacturing districts, factories that had once produced predominantly for American markets were retooling for domestic consumption and non-U.S. exports. Factory owner Zhang Min gave a tour of his transformed facility to a group of government officials. 2 years ago, 65% of our production went to the United States, he explained. Today, that's down to 30%, while our domestic sales have doubled and exports to ASEAN countries have tripled. How did you manage this transition? Asked a Commerce Ministry official. Substantial investment in retooling and workforce training. Shang admitted. The government support programs were essential concessional loans for equipment upgrades, tax credits for R&D, and export promotion assistance for new markets. This ground-level adaptation reflected China's broader economic strategy, using the external pressure of tariffs as a catalyst to accelerate the desired shift from export dependency to a more balanced economic model with stronger domestic consumption and higher value production. In diplomatic channels, quiet efforts to find a path toward de-escalation continued despite public rhetoric. Sarah Johnson, now promoted to a senior role at the U.S. Treasury Department, was meeting her counterpart from China's Ministry of Finance at a neutral location in Singapore. Our economic teams have identified potential areas for initial stabilization, Sarah suggested, reviewing a joint working document. Agricultural market reopening on your side, tariff reductions on certain consumer goods on our side. Her Chinese counterpart, Dr. Liu, from the Ministry of Finance, reviewed the proposal carefully. These could be initial confidence-building measures. But the fundamental issues remain unresolved. Your concerns about our industrial policies. Our concerns about your technology restrictions. True, Sarah acknowledged. But we need to start somewhere to break the cycle of escalation. A Phase 1 agreement that delivers tangible benefits could create space for addressing the deeper structural issues. As they worked through potential areas of compromise, both negotiators understood the delicate balance required, finding face-saving concessions that could be presented as victories to domestic audiences, while establishing a foundation for more substantive discussions. When Li Wei received the briefing on these preliminary discussions, he recognized both the opportunity and the challenge. The economic costs of prolonged conflict were mounting for both sides, creating incentives for de-escalation. Yet the fundamental strategic competition between the two largest economies remained unresolved. We should pursue this opening, he advised Vice Premier Chen. Not because we need relief, but because a stabilized trade relationship serves our broader economic objectives while we continue our internal strengthening and diversification. Chen nodded thoughtfully. So our strategy has worked. We've demonstrated we cannot be coerced, while positioning ourselves for negotiations on more equal footing. And we've accelerated necessary internal reforms in the process, Li added. The external pressure has created political space for difficult transitions that might otherwise have faced greater resistance, as preliminary agreement frameworks began to take shape in the following weeks. Both sides prepared their communications strategies carefully. Each would need to present the outcome as a victory to domestic constituencies while establishing a foundation for a more stable economic relationship for China. The experience had reinforced important strategic lessons. The value of precise, targeted countermeasures rather than blunt retaliation. The importance of diversifying economic relationships beyond any single market. The necessity of advancing technological self-reliance in critical sectors. And the effectiveness of patient, resolute diplomacy, combined with willingness to endure. Short-term economic pain for long-term strategic objectives. Li Wei reflected on these lessons as he prepared for the final negotiating session. The trade conflict had been costly for both sides, but it had also accelerated China's economic evolution in ways that might ultimately strengthen its position in the global economy. Sometimes external pressure, properly managed, could become a catalyst for necessary change. As he reviewed the draft agreement text, Li understood that this represented not an end, but a pause in a longer strategic competition. The fundamental tensions between the world's established superpower and its rising challenger would continue to shape the global economic landscape for decades to come. But for now, a modus vivendi had been established, one that reflected China's growing economic maturity and strategic sophistication. The art of war remained on his shelf, its ancient wisdom still relevant in an age of economic statecraft. In the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity, key vocabulary repeated throughout tariff, a tax imposed on imported goods or services, typically used to protect domestic industries or as a negotiating tool in trade disputes. Countermeasure, an action taken to counteract or offset another action, often in response to hostile or competitive moves. Strategic, relating to the identification of long-term aims and interests and the means of achieving them, often involving careful planning. Retaliation, the action of returning like for like, especially the infliction of harm in return for perceived harm or unfair treatment. Precision, the quality of being exact, accurate, and careful in actions or execution of plans. Rare earth elements, a group of 17 chemically similar elements crucial for many high-tech products and military applications, where China holds significant production capacity. Export control. Government, regulations limiting the export of certain goods, particularly those with potential military applications or strategic value. Currency depreciation, a decrease in the value of a currency relative to other currencies, which can make exports more competitive, but potentially trigger other economic issues. Domestic consumption, the purchase and use of goods and services within a country's own economy, as opposed to exports. Supply chain, the network of organizations, people, activities, information, and resources involved in delivering a product or service to consumers. War of attrition, a prolonged conflict where each side seeks to gradually wear down the other until one side can no longer continue. Diversification, the process of expanding into new markets or product lines to reduce dependency on any single factor. As we've seen through the story of the trade war between the world's two leading economic powers, language is not just a tool for communication, but a means to deeply understand complex global issues. China's strategy teaches us about patience, wisdom, and long-term vision, qualities that are also essential when learning a new language. Your English learning journey is much like a trade. Negotiation requiring strategy, persistence, and adaptability. Every new vocabulary word, every grammar structure you master becomes your own leverage in your negotiation with this language. If today's story has brought you both knowledge and joy in learning English, leave your mark with a gentle, like similar, to how China subtly adjusted its yuan exchange rate to counter tariffs. Share this video with friends who are learning English like a market diversification strategy for your knowledge. Each person you share with becomes a new trading partner in your language journey. Comment below with your favorite vocabulary from today's story. Think of it as a small negotiation where we exchange ideas and learn from each other. And finally, if you wish to build a long-term trade relationship with practical and engaging English knowledge, subscribe to Story-Driven English. Just as China prepared for a long war of attrition, our channel is ready to accompany you on your persistent learning journey from beginner to proficiency for a world where language is no longer a barrier. Let's learn English together through fascinating stories about the real world. See you in the next Story-Driven English video.